Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu and welcome to Spotlight. A lot has been said this week about the Grand Mufti of Australia, Dr. Ibrahim Abu Muhammad. Harun has the latest.
In what has been a tumultuous time in Australian politics in recent weeks, Prime Minister Tony Abbott has shifted the conversation once again to national security. In a short video posted on his official YouTube channel late last week, Mr. Abbott said,
"It's clear to me that for too long we have given those who might be a threat to our country the benefit of the doubt."
Mr. Abbott's long-standing vow to ban Muslim political party Hizb Ut-Tahrir has again resurfaced in light of these comments. Peak Muslim organisations, including the Lebanese Muslim Association and the Office of the Grand Mufti of Australia, Dr. Ibrahim Abu Muhammad, have united to condemn the proposed ban, with the Mufti suggesting moves against Hizb Ut-Tahrir are an attempt to escape from real dialogue and intellectual engagement, and that this was a way of keeping people scared and distracted from the real issues and failures of governments or politicians. Mr. Abbott's fragile relationship with the Muslim community has shown further signs of strain with his most recent criticism of the Mufti's comments, calling them wrong-headed and unhelpful. Controversial social commentator Andrew Bolt has demanded the Muslim community sack the Mufti, calling his support of Hizb ut-Tahrir's right to free speech alarming and accusing him of making Islam a legitimate source of suspicion. Bolt has even gone so far as to suggest that the Mufti is legitimising the rage and demands of Islamist terrorists, despite the Mufti's repeated condemnation of terrorist activity.
Joining me in the studio is Dr. Ibrahim Abu Muhammad, the Grand Mufti of Australia. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to the show. Prime Minister Tony Abbott has criticised you for speaking against a crackdown on Hizb Ut-Tahrir, a Muslim organisation. How would you respond to that?
In the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Firstly, I would like to make it clear that we categorically differ with Hizb ut-Tahrir. However, I am certain that Hizb ut-Tahrir does not engage in violence. They do not believe in it, nor do they support any organization that has engaged in violence. Why then should we ban them? Moral responsibility obliges me and every free individual to defend every citizen's right to express their opinion. And were this ban to be applied to any other entity that does not espouse or engage in violence, then my position would be the same. Perhaps you are annoyed with Hizb ut-Tahrir because they criticize you. In that case, there are many others who criticize you. Robert Fisk criticizes, Thierry Mason criticizes, Noam Chomsky criticizes. There are many people who criticize. They have written books and articles. Will you ban them? Will you ban their books in shops and ban their articles in magazines and papers? Their approach is similar to Hizb ut-Tahrir's. What exactly is going on?
Tony Abbott has also said that your comments were wrong-headed and unhelpful. How would you respond to the PM's criticism?
We agree with Tony Abbott in principle but differ with him in the details. As for the question that my comments were wrong-headed, that is his opinion. But when I was saying things that pleased him, they were wonderful words that he quoted and spoke of in the United Nations, more than once. But when I differed with his opinions, then my words were wrong-headed. It isn't he who determines the right and the wrong direction. We have sufficient intellect and know well what we are saying.
A controversial columnist, Andrew Bolt, has also criticised your eminence and the Muslim leadership in Australia for not doing enough to stand up against terrorism. How would you respond to that?
This journalist also does not dictate what we should do and what we shouldn't do. He also does not decide whether what we have done is enough or not. And we don't work for anyone to whom we must file a report that we have done this and that. We are free in this sense. Our work within the community and the service we have offered is more than adequate. We can stop doing the work we are doing, and thereby people will come to appreciate the work we're engaged in. This is the first point. Secondly, what does he have to do with the Muslim community, and what right does he have to meddle in its internal affairs?
Now, he's even been quoted saying, and I quote, that the Muslim community of Australia should fire this Mufti. And he continues to say, failing that, we must accept he does represent mainstream Muslim views and adjust our defences accordingly, unquote. How would you respond to that?
That is a very condescending attitude that is mockingly rebuffed by the community. Because the Muslim community is a free and open community that lives in a free and open society, that chooses its leaders in free elections, and therefore he has no right to involve himself in this way. This is meddling in the internal affairs of the community. That is rejected, and it is perhaps reflective of the spirit of supremacy and marginalization that this journalist is accustomed to.
Now, Islamophobic trends have been on the increase in Australia and overseas as well. What can we do as Australians to reverse the tide of religious intolerance here in Australia?
The disease of Islamophobia has spread all over the world, and it is fueled by particular entities that do not wish for stability in the world. It is necessary for everyone to know that we all ride on one ship. Anyone who makes a hole in this ship will drown us all. We must comfort one another, put our hands together. We must all stand together, hand in hand, and shoulder to shoulder, in the face of anything that threatens our peace, security, and stability. Also, for non-Muslims to understand that the presence of Muslims in Western societies is not a hindrance, but rather a contribution, and their presence is productive, beneficial, and constructive, and they do not obstruct progress or movement. On the contrary, they are harbingers of peace in society.
On that regard, do you have any specific advice for Australian Muslims?
Muslims in Australia and in other than Australia, Muslim minorities all over the world, must understand that they represent Islam as a message and its messenger, meaning that every Muslim living in Western society is an ambassador of the Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him. And therefore, this responsibility requires him to observe the most distinguished character traits and manners, a most distinguished civilized attitude, and the highest standards of education. This message to Muslims reaffirms that they bear God's mercy to humanity.
This is great advice for Australian Muslims. Do you have any specific advice for the Prime Minister Tony Abbott?
I respect the presence of Tony Abbott as a political leader of his party, and I respect the Australian community's choice in electing him. I personally elected him in the previous elections, but believe me, I will not repeat this mistake again. And that is my personal opinion. I will not repeat that mistake again. If there is any advice to be given, then with my full respect to the Australian people in choosing him, and my full respect to his presence as Prime Minister. But if there is an advice to give, and he will accept it from me with an open heart and without any hard feelings, I would say work in any other field but politics. Thank you very much.
Dr. Ibrahim Muhammad, the Grand Mufti of Australia, thank you for being with us. Well, it's not the first time that Hizb Ut-Tahrir has been under the spotlight. Prime Minister Tony Abbott has named the Muslim group specifically this time round. Our reporter Ali Dawich has the latest.
With the government pressure mounting on Hizb Ut-Tahrir and the Prime Minister set to release a national security statement this coming Monday, senior members of the group held an emergency press conference to clarify their position and to respond to the current government's mounting campaign against them.
The threat to ban Hizb Ut-Tahrir is laughable, for Hizb Ut-Tahrir is nothing but its ideas, and it would be disingenuous to believe one can ban ideas.
Our ideas are inherently non-violent. They seek to create public opinion for Islam, and this is quite ordinary for Muslims.
There is no doubt Abbott is hitting the terror button for purposes of political pragmatism. His announcements have little to do with national security and everything to do with personal job security.
With me in the studio is the media representative for Hizb Ut-Tahrir, Uthman Badar. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Does Hizb Ut-Tahrir promote violence or incite hatred towards the Western values?
Oh, that's a good question. But to be very frank, I think it's the actions of Western states that incite hatred or bring hatred towards the West. We've seen anti-Americanism, which is rife all across not just the Muslim world, but Africa and Asia. That's for reasons that I think people know. But in terms of Hizb Ut-Tahrir and whether we incite violence or hatred, I think we should separate between violence and hatred. As far as violence is concerned, we are very clear, and Hizb Ut-Tahrir is well known globally for the fact that it adopts a method that does not entail violence. Our approach in trying to bring about positive change in the Muslim world is based on conviction, convincing people, not based on coercion, and therefore there is no room for any material actions or violence in our method. Having said that, of course, we are not pacifists, we're Muslims, and as all Muslims know, there is a place for violence in Islam, there is a place for war in Islam with its conditions and qualifications. So for instance, if a land is occupied, we will support the right of those people, indeed the duty of those people to resist. If it's a violent occupation, the resistance will be violent. So I think sometimes these differences are blurred in order to say that we are violent, but otherwise, as I've said, our methodology to bring change has never and will never be based on violence.
Is this the reason that you think Hizb Ut-Tahrir is being singled out at the moment by Prime Minister Tony Abbott?
I think to understand Tony Abbott and the government's approach towards HT, we need to understand the context of this entire thing. Really, this is in the broader context of the so-called war on terror. When the war on terror started, we said right at the beginning that this is not about fighting violence or terrorism. This is about targeting fundamental Islamic ideals under the pretext of fighting terrorism. And this is what we've seen. So we've seen that the war on terror has morphed over time from a fight against terrorism to a fight against violent extremism to a fight against radicalization. And now it's really an open war on extremism. Of course, extremism is just about ideas. Any idea that's not acceptable to Western states seems now to be the target. And therefore, the reason I think HT specifically is being targeted in Australia is because we are perhaps the most outspoken in challenging the government's unjust policies, whether in the Muslim world or here in Australia with respect to the Muslim community.
Now, Hizb Ut-Tahrir is banned in Russia and in China and other places around the world. If Hizb Ut-Tahrir is banned in Australia by the Australian government, how will you operate here in Australia?
Look, I think it's important to understand this whole point. We hear this again and again in the media that HT is banned here, here and here, and it's used as a reason to say, well, you should also be banned here. But any keen observer will note that Hizb Ut-Tahrir is only banned in places which are dictatorships and which are ruled by tyrants. And we're banned there because we have a principled stance against these tyrants. And if Tony Abbott wants to follow in that path, if he wants to follow in the path of Mubarak and Sisi, that's for him to decide. But I think everyone should be concerned that we are hearing this sort of rhetoric. As in the other part of the world, we are not banned in the United States, we're not banned in the UK, we haven't been banned in Australia for the last 20 years. And it's not us who have changed our approach. Rather, it is the government who is now saying, no, it's not about violence anymore. Even ideas that we dislike are no longer acceptable.
Now, the Grand Mufti, Dr. Ibrahim Muhammad, has expressed a strong opposition to a crackdown on Hizb Ut-Tahrir, even though he is critical of the group themselves. Why should we as Australian Muslims be concerned if new legislation is passed?
Let me say that I appreciate this principled stand of the Mufti on this matter. But I would say very strongly that the Muslim community as a whole, in fact, even non-Muslims should be concerned, because the issue here is not HT in the end. HT is being used because it happens to be the most outspoken Muslim community group. But in the end, this is about the powerful, the elite, that 1% that seeks to stifle alternatives that are being expressed even when purely in peaceful and non-violent ways. So it's HT today, it could be any other Muslim group tomorrow. And we've seen Muslim groups being targeted before. In fact, we've seen how the Mufti's comments were responded to by the Prime Minister. It's effectively a case of, if you don't say what we say, well, you're wrong-headed, or you're unhelpful, or you're an extremist. So I think everyone should be worried as a matter of principle. It's not about whether it's me or you or someone else. As a matter of principle, stopping people from expressing their values, their views in peaceful ways is a step way too far.
Now, you did mention that you are quite outspoken as a group, and you do get quite a lot of media attention as well. Is there a reason why Hizb Ut-Tahrir has not condemned the actions of ISIS?
Again, that's a very important question. We have been very clear in opposing ISIS. When ISIS declared its so-called caliphate, we were one of the first groups on being asked by Muslims whether it's really the caliphate. Our global leader, Sheikh Ata ibn Khalil, issued a detailed response explaining why Islamically it's not the caliphate. Since then, our central media office in Beirut has issued statements. Our media offices in the in the United Kingdom, in Iraq, in Australia have all issued statements with clear opposition to the actions and the claims of ISIS. In fact, when Adnani put out his release the first time asking people, Muslims all over the world and in the West, to start attacking left, right and centre, I was one of the first, and this is on the record on my Facebook, I was one of the first to reject this and say this is not only senseless, it's un-Islamic. So people should not construe any of our statements as support for ISIS. We've been very clear on that. However, when it comes to condemnation, we're not naive. We know that there's a context here. ISIS has risen in response to a set of conditions for which Western states are responsible. And again, in dealing with the situation, Western states are further aggressing, going out on further war and further aggression against the Muslim world. And in this context, they are asking for condemnation. Obama's coming out and asking for everyone to condemn. We're not crazy to be played into an agenda that is far worse than anything that ISIS can do.
Uthman Badar, media representative for Hizb Ut-Tahrir, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. If there's any story that you'd like us to run, send us an email to spotlight@onepathnetwork.com. Until next time, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.